We were now very pleased to invite Dr. Yigal Bloch. Yigal is, like many of us in this room, a student of Wayne's. Yigal has a very extensive series of publications, including a book on the alphabetic scribes in Babylonia, a book on the Amorites, and too many articles for me to begin to talk about them, and is the curator at the Bible Lands Museum, where many of us were yesterday. So it's an honor and a privilege, and is also teaching at Bar-Ilan University this semester. It's an honor and privilege to have Dr. Bloch with us. He will speak on the name Sojourner of God, the earliest Hebrew name from Babylonia, and its possible implications for the exiles' theology and identity. So we're in a session that's going to talk a lot about names.
Good afternoon. I'll try to make it short. Sometime in the summer of 626 BCE, a scribe named Nabu-Etion-Napshati recorded in the city of Nippur a small cuneiform tablet. 27 centuries later, that tablet was found by local residents in Iraq and sold on the antiquities market, from where it finally made its way to the collection of the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York in 1886. The hand copy that you see on the screen was published by Ira Spar and Michael Yursa in the City MMA 4 volume in 2014. For those who are not fluent in Neo-Babylonian cuneiform, the tablet's translation from the same volume appears on the screen now. As you can see, the tablet is a death note for a very large amount of silver, 30 talents, which amount to 108,000 shekels. The debtors are 6 individuals who pledged to return the debt in the month of Elul, but they pledged to return it in the form of sheep rather than silver. The rate is 1 sheep per 1 shekel of silver, which is somewhat low for the sheep prices in the Neo-Babylonian period, but is attested. It is attested in another document from the same time, as Spar and Yursa pointed out. That document, BM 82563 from the British Museum, was published by Rocio de Riva in 2001, and it is another contract in which 15 people owe a debt of 5 minas of silver to be repaid in the form of 300 sheep. Like our tablet, BM 82563 was written in the accession year of Sin Shumulisher, king of Assyria, actually a magnate who proclaimed himself king and was recognized as such for a few months in Babylonia, apparently in the same year when Nabopolassar rose to the throne of Babylon, that is in 626 BCE. Of the short reign of Sin Shumulisher, only 7 tablets are known, all from Babylonia, and almost all written in the cities of Nippur and Babylon between the months Simanu and Ululu, that is in a period when Nabopolassar was already recognized as king in the southern city of Uruk, as shown by Paul-Hélène Beaulieu in 1997. Yet, BM 82563 was written in the city of Rua, located somewhere in the vicinity of Uruk, and probably populated by the Aramean tribe of the same name. That city's location near Uruk is reflected in the New Assyrian letter ABL 286, which is now edited as SAA 22.4. One of the witnesses to the death note in BM 82563 was the governor Shaknu of Rua, so an official. This indicates that at the time of the writing, the authority of Sin Shumulisher was recognized even in the far south of Babylonia, and the authority of Nabopolassar was probably circumscribed to the city of Uruk alone. Unfortunately, the month and day in the formula of the tablet have not been preserved. In any event, the silver in BM 82563 is recorded as property of the god Shamash, and the official who has to collect the sheep in the month Ululu is mentioned as a messenger of Shamash. This is similar to our tablet, CTMMA 41, in which the silver also belongs to Shamash, and the debtors pledged to deliver sheep to Shamash. In addition, in our tablet, one of the witnesses is the royal resident commissioner, Kepu, of Sipar, an official sent by the king to supervise the affairs of the city and its temple. This means that both our tablet and BM 82563 belong to the archive of Ebabar, the temple of the god Shamash in Sipar. Spar and Yursa noted that the number of sheep implied by our tablet would be enormous, over 108,000 sheep. It would be absolutely enormous if it referred to sheep intended for offerings in the temple, and suggested instead that, quote, this transaction refers to a herding contract, by which the temple's flocks were placed in the hands of herdsmen, active in central Babylonia, in the area of Nippur, perhaps with the intention of keeping them safe from the Babylonian, Assyrian, and Indo-Assyrian conflicts, that ravaged parts of Babylonia at the time, unquote. This is a very reasonable suggestion, which was accepted by Tero Alstola in his 2020 monograph of Judeans in Babylonia. So if our tablet is indeed a herding contract, one should assume the same for BM 82563, although the number of sheep there is much smaller. The extent of the struggles for the thrones of Assyria and Babylonia at the time when these tablets were written is somewhat unclear, as the chronological relation between the reigns of Sin Shumu-Lisher and his rival king Sin Shara Ishkun, who managed to actually hold the Assyrian throne, is still debated. Anyway, the area around Nippur may have been more firmly controlled by Sin Shumu-Lisher than the area near Uruk, and for this reason many more sheep of a Babel were sent to pastures around Nippur. The actual number of sheep entrusted to the shepherds would probably be even larger, and our tablet records only those sheep that had to be returned to Sipar, excluding those intended for the shepherds themselves as compensation for their labor. Beside its date and political context and the number of sheep implied, the most interesting detail in the tablet CTMMA 4.1 is the name of one of the herdsmen, Girema. It has been commonly understood as a form of the name Gir Yama, a Babylonian way to record the Hebrew name Geryahu with a diphthong contraction. This seems to be indeed the most reasonable understanding of the name, which makes it stand out with regard to the names of other 5 herdsmen, all of which are linguistically Akkadian. If the understanding of Girema as Geryama is correct, it also makes this name the earliest attested Hebrew name in Babylonia.
Again, what's the year?
626 BC.
Ah.
Yes. So our tablet is placed precisely at the time of transition from the Neo-Assyrian to the Neo-Babylonian Empire, and therefore Girema could not have belonged to the community of exiles who were brought by Nebuchadnezzar to Babylonia from Judah about 25 years later and more. This Girema must have been a descendant of Israelites or Judeans deported to Mesopotamia by one of the Assyrian kings from Tiglath-Pileser III to Sennacherib. It is unknown how old Girema was at the time of the writing and how he or his ancestors made their way from Assyria to Babylonia, but his name shows that some descendants of the Israelites or Judeans deported by the Assyrian kings preserved their ethnic identity for several generations. Since the early rabbinic literature, the Hebrew term ger means mostly someone who converts to Judaism, or at least who accepts certain demands of the Jewish religious law, which is ger toshav in rabbinic terminology. But the original meaning of this term in Semitic languages was different and had to do with the relations between a patron and his client, and also between neighbors. This scope of meaning is preserved in classical Arabic jar. In the Aramaic inscriptions from the city of Palmyra from the Roman period, the term ger or gere with the third masculine singular possessive suffix can mean both patron and client, and you can see examples on the screen. A common situation in which one would need a patron was when a person moved, for any reason, from his home location to another place. This is what we see in the Palmyrene inscription PAT 319, where a Nabatean cavalryman was stationed on the island of Ana on the Middle Euphrates, and probably needed the patronage of the Palmyrene Zabidah, son of Shimon, son of Bel Aqab, on his travels to that destination and back. The situation of a client temporarily residing with his patron is reflected by the English verb to sojourn, which is commonly used to translate the biblical Hebrew verb gur, from which the noun ger is derived. In Northwest Semitic languages, personal names of the type ger, divine name, gerdien, are quite common in Phoenician and Punic, as you can see on the screen. Now, these instances are taken from the book by Frank Benz on Phoenician and Punic personal names. And they have their names such as Ger Melkart, Ger Sochen, and even Ger Hechal, which means something like sojourner of the palace or of the temple. Additional examples are Ger Ashtart, Ger Tzid, and Ger Tzafon. I can add that in the Bible Lands Museum, Jerusalem, where I work as a curator, there is a funerary urn with a Phoenician inscription mentioning a deceased woman by the name Gerat Melech. So, quite a common type of names in Phoenician. In Aramaic, names of this type are much rarer, although we do have examples such as Ger El and Ger Tzafon, as well as the shortened hypochoristic form Gera. When Phoenician or Aramaic-speaking parents gave their children such names, they probably did not intend them to sojourn anywhere, but rather identified those children as metaphorical clients of the respective deities or institutions, as in Phoenician, Ger Echad. In the Hebrew Bible, there is only one name that clearly includes the element ger. This is Gera, a hypochoristic name which is borne by several persons from the lineage of Benjamin, son of Jacob. Those are the son of Benjamin in the book of Genesis, 2 or 3 grandsons of Benjamin in the book of Chronicles, and of course the father of the judge Ehud in Judges, and the father of Shimei, a rebel against David, in the books of Samuel and Kings. 2 other possible candidates for the names with the element ger are Gershom and Gershon. Yet, as observed by Ran Sadok, the names Gershom and Gershon derive more likely from the common noun geresh, meaning agricultural yield or produce. However, the Hebrew Bible itself derives the name of Gershom, the firstborn son of Moses, from the noun ger in Exodus 2:22 and 18:3, as we can see on the screen. In both these instances, the alleged derivation from ger is a secondary interpretation, midrash shem, as they say in Hebrew. Nonetheless, it is attested already in the earliest strata of the Pentateuch, in the Yahwist and the Elohist sources, according to the documentary hypothesis, which most likely predate both the Assyrian and the Babylonian exile. So, the link between the notion of ger as a sojourner in a foreign location and the giving of a personal name is quite early in the Hebrew Bible itself. So, what do we know about the biblical ger as a personal status? The term is attested 92 times in the Hebrew Bible, 2/3 of them in the various law corpora in the Pentateuch that demand humane treatment of a stranger. The earliest attestations in a legal context appear in the Covenant Code in Exodus 22 and 23. 2 large concentrations of the term ger appear in the Holiness Code in Leviticus 17 to 26, which has 20 occurrences of the term, and in the book of Deuteronomy, 22 occurrences of the term. The notion of a personal dependence between a patron and a client still surfaces in Deuteronomy 1:16, which quotes the words of Moses. Quote, "And I charged your judges at that time, saying, hear the causes between your brethren, and judge righteously between every man and his brother, and the stranger that is with him," gero in Hebrew. Interestingly, here the English translation of the King James Version retains the notion of personal relationship, expressed in Hebrew by a possessive suffix, which is missing from more recent English translations. Elsewhere, when the noun ger appears in Deuteronomy with a possessive suffix, it clearly uses the collective singular, referring to all the strangers or sojourners residing in the Israelite cities, literally in your gates, b'sharecha, in plural. A distinction between an Israelite and a ger is maintained in Deuteronomy 14:21. Quote, "You shall not eat anything that dies of itself. You may give it to a stranger, ger, residing in your towns for them to eat, or you may sell it to a foreigner, for you are a people holy to the Lord your God," unquote. But this is the only distinction of this kind in the book of Deuteronomy, and biblical scholars debate whether it can be extended to all the occurrences of ger in this book. A radical move to a vision of complete equality between a ger and a native-born Israelite, ezrach, was made in the Holiness Code. With regard to the eating of an animal that died of itself, the situation which we found in Deuteronomy 14:21, we can see the change in Leviticus 17, verse 15. So, all persons, native-born or alien, ger or ezrach, who eat what dies of itself or what has been torn by wild animals, shall wash their clothes and bathe themselves in water, and be unclean until the evening. They shall be clean. More general expressions of the same notion of equality between a ger and the native-born Israelite can be found in Leviticus 19:34 and 24:22, as we can see again on the screen. The Holiness Code presents the Israelites themselves as gerim before their God, which has very practical implications with regard to the sale and ownership of the land. Those implications are spelled out in Leviticus 25, the chapter which details the laws of the sabbatical and jubilee years. But the land must not be sold beyond your claim, for the land is mine. You are but strangers resident with me. So, the notion that every Israelite is a ger made its way to biblical prayers. One example appears in Psalms 39:13. "Hear my prayer, O Lord, give ear to my cry, do not disregard my tears. For like all my forebears, I am a stranger, resident with you." Another example is 1 Chronicles 29:15, part of a prayer that the author of Chronicles, in the Persian or even the Hellenistic period, put in the mouth of David, "For we are sojourners with you. mere residents like our fathers. Our days on earth are like a shadow with nothing in prospect. Biblical scholars who studied the development of the term ger, such as Christoph Bultmann and Jose Ramirez Kid, posit that this notion is derived from the Holy Myth Code. Although many scholars date the Holy Myth Code to the Persian period, I think there are good reasons, including the use of the term Ezrach, to consider it pre-exilic, influenced to some degree by Neo-Assyrian terminology, as I have argued elsewhere. Pre-exilic in these terms means that the Holy Myth Code was originally composed before the Babylonian exile. But even at that time, the Holy Myth Code would likely be influenced not only by Assyrian terminology, but also by the Assyrian practice of mass deportations, which affected the kingdoms of Israel and Judah, among others. Such deportations would easily make the remaining inhabitants of Judah after 701 BCE understand that their life on their own land could easily come to an end if it were not for the grace of their God. This would imply that an Israelite or Judahite, wherever he lives, is only a ger, sojourner with his God. The shift of the term ger from the sphere of interpersonal relations between a client and the patron to that of the relationship of all the Israelites and Judeans with their God led to the emergence of what biblical scholars call pilgrim theology. It was one of the first steps on the way that eventually led to the rabbinic understanding of this term as a sojourner with God par excellence, that is, a proselyte. So, was the name of Girema, whom we have seen in the tablet CTMMA 4.1, given to him in light of this understanding? Well, some words of caution are in order. And that is because, as I mentioned earlier, although the only personal name in the Hebrew Bible that clearly contains the element ger is Gerah, still the name Geriyahu, which is the same as Girema, does appear in a Neo-Assyrian administrative tablet from Nimrud, ancient Kalach, written around 730 BC, and we have seen this name earlier. The tablet was originally published by Barbara Parker in 1961 and discussed again with a complete updated translation by Gershon Galil in 2009. We can see Galil's translation now on the screen. This tablet belongs to a group of tablets from the reign of Tiglath-Pileser III, and lists different number of persons placed at the disposal of some named officials. Two of those officials bear Hebrew names, Hilkiyahu and Giriyahu. Of course, the latter is an Assyrian form of Geriyahu. Gershon Galil read the town name here as Sagbat and argued that it was Bit-Sagbat in Media near modern Hamadan, but Ran Tzadok in 2015 published a collation of the tablet which showed that the town name should be read differently. Dimit, which is the same as the town Dimeki mentioned elsewhere in the tablet. It's not clear where that town was, but maybe in the region of Haran in northeastern Syria. Of course, the presence of officials with Hebrew names means that in this period they must have been deportees from the northern kingdom of Israel, and therefore the tablet must be dated, if it's from the reign of Tiglath-Pileser, must be dated somewhere between 733 and 727 BCE. The name of Giriyahu in this Assyrian tablet was obviously given to him some decades before, when his parents lived in the kingdom of Israel and the Assyrian exile still lay for them in a relatively distant future. Semantically, this name must belong to the type of Gerdian names, which are abundantly attested in Phoenician and Punic, as we have seen, and which refer to their bearers as metaphorical clients of the respective deities. So the notion of being a stranger or a sojourner probably did not come to expression in such names. So, does the name of Girema in CTMMA 4.1 reflect a similar notion? Perhaps. When we read a continuous text, the meaning of an unclear or an ambiguous term can often be understood from the context. A problem with personal names is that they are independent of their immediate context. The meaning of CTMMA 4.1 would not be any different if another name figured there instead of Girema, or no name at all. Yet, personal names do have a socio-cultural context, reflecting the life circumstances of the people who gave a name to their child, or the child's own life circumstances if he or she adopted their name in adulthood. In this regard, although we cannot demonstrate that the parents of Girema, who was active in Babylonia in 626 BCE, were affected in any way in their name-giving practices by the fact of their life in exile, such a possibility stands out as reasonable. In biblical sources, specifically in the Holy Myth Code, the observation of the realities of exile led to a notion that an Israelite or a Judahite is a sojourner with Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, wherever he lives, even though the author of that source probably still lived in Judah. It is quite possible that the same observation led Girema's parents to the same conclusion in their exile in Mesopotamia. In such an instance, a single personal name, Hebrew Geriyahu, would bear different connotations in different historical circumstances, 100 years apart. Earlier I mentioned the name of Moses' firstborn son, Gershom, which is interpreted in the book of Exodus as deriving from the circumstances of Moses' life in exile. That is a secondary interpretation, but it was probably known to the parents of another Gershon, a descendant of the priestly lineage of Phinehas, who gave him this name in the Babylonian exile sometime before he went to Jerusalem with Ezra, according to Ezra 8, verse 2. So our conference focuses on the notion of indigeneity. For many indigenous populations in ancient and modern times, forced displacement was a sad reality of life. Biblical thought, much of which was shaped by the experience of exile, coped with this by maintaining that the Israelites' right to their land was given by God. It was God who explicitly promised that land to Abraham, even though Abraham himself was a sojourner from elsewhere, ger v'toshav, according to the priestly source in Genesis 23:4. And from that viewpoint, an Israelite living in the exile would still retain the right to the land of his ancestors, as long as he or she was a sojourner with God who had promised it to them. Thank you.
Thank you.